Welcome to A Thing Per Week, and today's subject is modern dating. As we have all probably experienced, there has been a recent change in how dating works. Younger generations just don't do things the same way as all others have done until now. In this video, I'll be discussing a study that I've done and my conclusions and top up some things that I want to talk about. First of all, this study, it was made by me with help some friends on opinions or things that had to be rated subjectively in order to try and reach the most objective conclusion. The study is on the popular dating show by Cut the Button. A brief recap if you don't know what it is about. It's a show where guys and girls basically speed date each other, and the speed dates can also be lesbian, but I think I never saw a gay one. They have to strike up a conversation, and if one of the two don't like the other and want to swap him or her out, they wait until the button lights up red and then have to hit it. I've recently seen a lot of YouTubers covering the series, and seeing their reaction to them, awkward and weird situations can be, pushed me to do this study. I measured 6 variables. First of all was the overall attractiveness for men, which my friends helped me rate in order to achieve a more objective average. Then was the overall attractiveness of women, the same thing with the rate. Then when measuring the most defining characteristic of men, and let me explain myself here, characteristic is what the date could notice at first glance, either with physical appearance or how they carried themselves or within the first few seconds of conversation. The main categories in which men fell were awkward, just by the way they presented themselves and mainly rated as such when they stayed in silence for the first second and did an awkward stare. Overweight, this one just pretty much explains itself. Confident, which was assigned when the guy started off the conversation and showed overall good social skills, but this didn't correlate with the way that they looked, with mainly extravagant looks. Feminine, which was assigned to guys that had a more feminine way of speaking and were clothing more traditionally worn by women. Manly, which was assigned to men that possessed the confident rating but were also conventionally dressed as a man, and some others that we will see later. Then we assigned a defining characteristic to the women, which was similar to that one from the men, except for some changes in the rating. Feminine was assigned to women when they portrayed the usual characteristics that we give to women, and manly was given when they were dressed up in a conventionally male clothing and were assertive over the day. Another prominent category was face, where women's defining characteristics that they had an uneven face or some part of it, like the nose or chin, was way too prominent. The 5th variable was the reason given for hitting the button, where they gave non-applicable 2 reasons that were way too specific, and the other 2 that didn't explain themselves are match, where either of the 2 said that they just weren't a match but still would be friends, and fear, which was given when the button was buzzed in a defensive way because the other person would have buzzed them out anyway. The final variable was the inferred reason for hitting the button, which could either be the same as the given reason or might have been different, something that I also had my friends help me with. Now that we've explained the variables and I've watched all the existing episodes of the button, we can get into the result. First of all, I'll show the percentage of buzzes by each gender, where we can see a noticeable difference between men and women, with almost double the amount of buzzes given by girls than guys. Then we can look at the average looks for girls, which was mostly an average, but with some 1s or 2s, but also some 8s and 9s. I made it a point for myself that unless a supermodel came to the show, I would not give a 10 to anyone. And the average looks for guys, which were mostly in the average to low threshold, with most men receiving a 5 or less, but less than a third actually got a higher rating than that, the highest being an 8. When it comes to girls' defining characteristics, femininity and overweightness were the most common, nothing too much surprising, and the defining feature that most common in guys was awkwardness, followed by being overweight, manly, confident, and feminine. In terms of given reason, for girls it was either none, where they just didn't give a reason, or non-applicable, which was very specific reasons. The distinction that can be made between the vibe and the vibes category is that the one where it was just vibes, it was the vibes of the conversation overall, and the one that's vibe, it's just the vibe of the other person, if you can get what I mean. The next reason most often given was that they were not a match, nothing too out of the ordinary since not every 2 people got well together. And in terms of given reason by men, it would mainly be that they were not a match, he didn't like her looks or other specific reasons, followed by the vibes category, which was quite surprising to see that no men thought that the vibe of the woman was off. I'm only referring to the vibe of the conversation. Up to the inferred reason, which for girls was mainly the same as the given reason except for the cases in which it was looks or fear. It's important to understand that these results were only in cases where there was an obvious disagreement between they were thinking and what they said, with the same thing applying to men, where other that same looks was the main reason. Now that we've seen the results of the investigation, off to some things that caught my attention in the results when correlating variables. First off, the matches except for 3 were in the ones in which the women were feminine. feminine, with man not having a main feature when the matches occurred. This kind of shows that men who were mainly down to have a second date with many girls didn't choose overweight or manly women. But with the male results for matches being all over the place, there was no main defining characteristic that got men second dates. Adding to this is the fact that when there was a feminine woman, men were far less likely to press the button, with only 6 men buzzing out a feminine woman, but with feminine women buzzing out up to 30 men. We can see that they were able to choose the date with more freedom than men. Moving on, when we look at women with any kind of facial abnormality, they were far more likely to buzz out their date defensively. Their counterparts were also more likely to buzz them out, with a 2-to-1 rate of button presses shifting to a 1-to-1. This was also the case when the women were overweight, from where we can draw the conclusions that men preferences tend not to align with these characteristics. Turning to a very noticeable abnormality, men that were feminine did not get the chance to buzz out their dates, with them always being buzzed out by the women. This 100% rate shows that, contrary to what some people might tell you, when trying to make a good first impression with the intention of going on a date with someone, being feminine will get you rejected most of the time, with none of the matches involving neither a feminine or overweight man. So maybe it's time to go hit the gym and be a little more confident and maybe buzz out some girls yourself. Another thing that was quite weird was the fact that even though none of the matches were with overweight men or women, a few cases in which there were both an overweight man and women, the women would very quickly buzz him out, saying that he was just not his type. I'll just let you draw conclusions from that. And another thing involving overweight men was that they still held the average button press rate, around a third of the interactions with overweight men ending up of them buzzing the women out, something that aligned with the average. Another fact that was very noticeable was the awkward character, with most of the interactions that started with an awkward man ending up with either of the two being buzzed the first time the button turned red. Despite this, the percentage of buzzes when an awkward man was involved was still close to the average, with most of the times in which there was a reason given for either the man or woman eliminating the other was just the vibes of the conversation were off. Lastly, I got to see some pretty absurd rampages where either a man or a woman buzzed a lot of people out in a row. They were mainly being done by women, with more than 5 instances in which the woman buzzed out more than 4 people in a row, with a top of being 7. Interesting thing was that the women that went on rampages were most of the times not very attractive, buzzing out people at the first chance that they got and quoting slight imperfections in the other person. As the women that went on rampages but were of average attractiveness often had longer dates and would get a chance to have these rampages because men would find them too attractive to buzz them out. There were instances where the rampages would either lead to not there being any matches, but this rarely occurred. By the way, the highest rampage that a guy got to was 4 presses, with the rampages ending when they found someone too attractive to buzz quickly, but who did buzz them out. Having said all this, I think I've touched on all the interesting things that I discovered, and the video is already really long, so I'm going to end it after a brief thought of mine. After watching all the cringy button videos, I've gotten a good understanding of how to carry yourself in order to get girls, but I've also reached another conclusion. I've seen how all of the matches were with feminine girls, which has led to me questioning the whole idea of feminism and the you go girl attitude, which I really heavily criticized before doing the experiment. Seeing that most successful encounters happened when a feminine girl was involved should give me and you a reason not to chase girls that aren't so. That's just an idea and you can do with it whatever you want. With all that said and my time running out, this has been a thing per week, and a sub and a like to the channel will be greatly appreciated, and I'll see you next time.